Hello, everyone. It is Bilal here. We're going to be doing another episode of Bilal's Take. Now, before we get into it, I first want to address a couple of things regarding my specific podcasts. Obviously, I started off State of the Secretary, which was going to focus on previous secretaries of state. I was going to cover Hillary Clinton. I was going to cover some other historical ones. Um, the series kind of fell off because I didn't realize how much research that first episode was going to take. It takes just around 3 hours of research, and that was far easier because I had a book to use. It was the trial of Henry Kissinger. I could use that, which was written by Christopher Hitchens. So now, my next episode is going to be far shorter than that. It's likely going to be on Rex Tillerson. I'll try to get that out within 2 weeks, before colleges come out. I'm looking at you, Georgetown. But yeah, that's gonna be that. But now just sit back, relax, and I am going to be talking about populism within the United States. What breeds it? What heeds it? And is it here in the present day United States? And the answer to that second question should be absolutely obvious. Of course it is. But how did we get here? Donald Trump, he was kind of a political figure that not a lot of people expected. Now, by the end of it, we can look back and say, well, of course, it was absolutely expected. But when you're in the midst of the moment, you can't really know what's going on. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to try and look at some historical examples and, try and understand what populism really is. Now, in GovPol, we've been talking about elections. We've been talking about political parties. It's the last couple of units that you cover in AP government politics for the United States, U.S. government politics. One of the things that came out to me was the formation of political parties and Duverger's law. Now, political parties are kind of self-explanatory. You've had fifth, sixth party system just about. Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right, moderates in the center, and we try to capture those moderates. Because each side has beliefs. The left is going to lean towards helping everyone else, government intervention, stuff like that. Republicans are going to lean more towards laissez-faire, or laissez-faire, however you pronounce it, however you choose to pronounce it. Less government intervention, the market will control itself. That's kind of how it goes. And then, of course, you have the left in terms of social issues, pro-abortion, allowing, gay marriage, LGBTQ community, stuff like that. And the right believes, in religious freedom, allowing people that believe in God to be protected, allowing for, certain beliefs, certain conservative beliefs, usually religious beliefs, to have some safety in a world that's more and more becoming secular. And that's just the makeup of how it is. There's nothing that can really go against that. So, once again, Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right, they tend to be more moderate parties. And this goes to Duverger's law. Now, in the United States, we have plurality rule, which basically means you don't need to get 51%. Most people, or, a majority of people don't need to like you, just more than the other guy. So if you have three people, if you have three people running for election and 100 people voting, you just need 34 votes because the other two guys are going to get 33 and 33. You got the most, not even close to a majority, but hey, you win. This, along with single-member districts, is what results in Duverger's law, which basically means there will be two parties. They will each be just left and just right of the political center. Now, in the United States, this isn't what we really have. It's kind of a variation of Duverger's law. And there will be periods where the United States will be far left. There will be periods where the United States is far right. You can look at this in the past, 50, 60 years. Lyndon B. Johnson, he was pretty far left if you look at his social programs. Now, Nixon, he was kind of like an intermediate, but then Reagan, there's no disputing that he was far right. And then in between these far left and far right, we'll have, periods of more moderate political parties, more moderate political beliefs. After Lyndon B. Johnson, who do we have? We have Nixon, who for the most part was obviously a Republican, but he promoted the Great Society. And then after Reagan, who did we have? We had H.W. Bush, but we also had Clinton as a New Democrat. And then, same thing with George W. Bush and Obama. During the elections, there wasn't that much difference. George Bush, when he ran, George Bush Jr., I should say, was not that much different from Al Gore for certain issues, you know? When it came to when it came to education, for example, infrastructure, they generally agreed on that. Some of the issues that they might have disagreed on would be environmentalism and, you know, government intervention. But, you know, besides that, both parties generally agreed. I mean, a lot of people argue that Obama was super far left for having a bailout, but the first bailout was in 2008 under George Bush, you know, TARP. So when you have the 2004, 2008, 2012 elections, it's between two people that are just left and just right of the political center. And how does Diverger's law work? Well, you have a large group in the center of moderates, and that's who you're trying to capture. Because if you look at moderates, they're going to be the easiest to sway. You're not going to get a Tea Party to vote for a Democrat. You're not going to get a Bernie Sanders supporter to vote for Rand Paul. It's just not going to work. So what do? Each party, when they have these periods of being far left and far right, when they realize that they're going out of power or that they're losing popularity, they go towards the center. And that's, on average, how the parties work. You'll have this bell curve kind of shape, you know, with the center being representing the peak of the curve. And most moderates, since they center around there, are going to be the bulk of the vote. And so both parties will kind of be right next to that. And as time goes on, they realize that moderates are going to be easier to get out to go in mass, because there are more moderates than there are radicals. There are more moderates than there are people that hold extreme or intense beliefs, you know, that go on either side. So once again, I'm not just talking about the left or the right. I'm not just talking about the alt-right or, you know, Trumpism. I'm talking about on both sides of the spectrum. So you have this big mass in the center, but, you know, the parties will still generally be off to the side. That's how they have the differences. That's how you identify yourself. But by 2012, if you're looking from like the 60s to 2012, you know, both sides had gradually been moving closer and closer towards the center, to the point where by 2008, John McCain and Barack Obama are touting many of the same policies. For example, Barack Obama, during the 2008 election cycle, he was not in support of gay marriage. You know, they were both in favor of military intervention if it made sure that the United States was protected. Now, of course, Obama, he said that he'd get us out of Iraq, but that never really happened, right? He was against, you know, government intervention. He was against that type of stuff, but they both propagated it. They're very similar candidates, is what I'm trying to say. And then once again with Mitt Romney, you know, they differed on certain, you know, outside appeal, you know, how they presented themselves, how they made themselves look like in terms of persons. But you have to remember, Obamacare came from the Democrats, and then Romneycare was in Massachusetts from Mitt Romney, a Republican, which was still rather left. So you have both parties moving farther and farther towards the center. And as they move farther and farther towards the center, if you look at the bell curve, right, it's kind of like let's imagine it like a sphere, you know, let's imagine it a semicircle, right? As you have both parties move farther and farther towards the center, they get more moderate votes. More moderates are willing to vote for either party. And so that moves up, that moves up, that moves up. But then imagine it moves from like a semicircle to more of like a triangle, and then an elongated triangle, right? Like an extremely tall triangle. I don't know how I'm really trying to describe it. But, you know, if both sides are moving closer and closer towards the center, so more moderates are voting, but then the parties represent the extremes less and less. So they're coming together more and more and more. So then the people that are liberal and the people that are conservative feel less and less left out. But they realize that they're not going to be able to get anyone to represent their views. So then they stop voting. Because they stop really going out. They stop being part of the political process. And then this is where you get, you know, what Nixon called the silent majority. As both parties move towards the center, the people that are left out on the not even the far left, just like liberalism, and on the right with standard conservatism, they feel less and less like they have a voice. And the most passionate voices are on the extremes. So, you know, when the parties have moved left, when the parties have moved right, when the parties have moved towards that center, they say, okay, who's going to represent us? And that's when you have the discovery of either third parties or you have Trump. Now, first let's address the third party, right? well, this is really what happened at Ross Perot. People were disillusioned with George H.W. Bush, and they chose third parties as an alternative. And Bill Clinton kind of seized on this. He moved very much to the center because he realized, he could capture up that conservative vote that had been disillusioned by George H.W. Bush and was now turning towards Ross Perot. And he captured it, and he won. But then, with Donald Trump, since everyone was moving towards the center, since everyone was disillusioned with the Tea Party this time, since the party, the Republicans, realized they could no longer control the Tea Party, they tried to get more moderate candidates, candidates that were fake, candidates that were politicians through and through and through. So Donald Trump, he represents the people that have been left out as both parties move towards the center. And that's the origin of populism. Because since no one was representing the people on the far right, there was no competition. The Tea Party had even started to, concede defeat. They were just making noise in Congress, but they weren't effective. They couldn't do anything. Now, the Republicans were getting sick and tired of that. And then you have Trump. And, the exact same thing happened to the left. People that were disillusioned with the Democrats, they moved towards Senator Sanders, who I'm a big fan of, but there's no ignoring the trends. Returning one more time to Diverger's Law, since you have these two parties, when they become too similar, it makes it seem as if there's only one party with the only difference being the letter next to their name. Both parties, if they agree too much, if there's not a little bit of tension of stalemate, that means that people are voting in the same type of politician. They're voting in not, people that are going to represent their views, but just politicians. That's it. Nothing more. So then, you got Trump. Because Trump represented, what Trump represents is that far right, the group of the far right, that felt that they were no longer being appreciated. The parties moved toward the center, they were left behind, and Trump came and took the reins of the disadvantaged group, the group that had been forgotten. And this is a trend that dates back all the way back to Reagan. You can date it all the way back to people like FDR. And of course, perhaps the most famous populist in U.S. history, William Jennings Bryan. It's a trend. People feel like they're not being represented by the two parties, and they flock to the one person that will represent them. It doesn't matter if it's William Jennings Bryan. It doesn't matter if it's FDR. It doesn't matter who it is. There just needs to be somebody. Because that person that they believe is going to help their voice be heard again. When both parties move towards the center, that one person that will make sure that their voice is heard again. Well, in their perspective, it's defending their way of life. They're far more passionate. The moderates in the center, they're doing it because, they can. It's not like there's going to be radical change. So, I have a slight preference here, a slight preference there. That decides to vote for the party. But the people on the right, the people on the far right, the people on the left, the people on the far left, they're thinking this is a fight for my way of life. Since no one is fighting me, this is my last chance. So they throw everything that they've got behind that one candidate. It doesn't matter how vile they are. It doesn't matter how extreme they are. It doesn't matter what it is there. It doesn't matter if they're a demagogue. It doesn't matter what they do. Because they're not fighting for a politician or the slight preferences that might exist in the center with the moderates. They're fighting for their way of life. So yeah, when people say they voted for Donald Trump, it doesn't mean that they believe in racism. It doesn't mean that they believe in, the Christian equivalent of Sharia law. What they were doing is trying to defend their way of life. They thought that their idea of America was under attack. And all they wanted to do was make America great again. They just wanted to make sure that they could live on. And if Trump can do it, so be it. And that concludes my episode on what populism means in the modern day United States. So I want to thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I hope you come back for the next podcast. See you guys later. Peace.